IVM.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode 38 of The Fighting Goat. We are here live and we have a very special guest after the first commercial break, but that's coming up. Before that, let us talk about what happened in the week. Mystic Chips. What kind of a afternoon card was that? It was banging.
It was a great card, man. I mean, if you look at the stats of the card, I have never seen so many finishes on one card. It's actually fun. And I can't believe I saw the replay. I should have seen it live. I'm such an idiot. I fell asleep. But come on, it was at 2:30 in the morning for us.
Yeah, but that's a regular time for you to be up.
Big bhai, wo zamana chala gaya when I have to be able to drink and stay awake now. Now I've become a responsible person.
जाने कहाँ गए वो दिन?
जाने कहाँ गए वो दिन?
But
किसी को सोना भी.
Nine finishes out of 11 fights on the prelim card and the main card. The main card had 4 finishes out of 5. Just the main event of the evening, Max Holloway versus Yair Rodriguez, which was a banger of an event, went to a decision. But be it Song Etong, be it Chaos Williams, Felicia Spencer, and De Lima, who finished off Ben Rothwell. Oh man, what was that?
Dude,
it was an afternoon card. I love it.
It was incredible. But the thing is that Ben Rothwell's finish was highly debated though. I don't know why people were saying that it was a unjust stoppage. I think he was out of it. It was absolutely warranted. And
absolutely.
Was hurt, man. There was nothing more that could have been done.
A lot of heat coming in on Herb Dean for that one, but I saw that replay 3 or 4 times. I think Herb Dean was on point.
Dude, he is one of the best referees in the game. He's spot on. And also, everybody remember, referees are human. They make mistakes. They make mistakes like everybody. It's normal. And he didn't make a mistake. That's the best
This was no mistake.
Correct.
In fact, Ben Rothwell was hurt. He collapsed, and that's when he went for a takedown.
And boom, he fell forward.
And he still got some hammer fist, and Herb Dean stopped it to avoid any further damage. So again, that is our take on it.
Whether you have to call him Herbinator, huh?
Herbinator. Sorry.
The Herbinator. You call him the Herbinator.
Can I have some eggs with Herbinator?
Like how Harbhajan's name is the Terminator? Like that is Herb Dean's name is now the Herbinator. It's my popular demand. And first, ladies and gentlemen, look at our t-shirts.
Look at the Fighting Goat.
Fighting Goat. Yay. We'll be wearing our own merchandise. And also, again, another big shout out for a lot of guys who have been asking for our merchandise. Guys like Arjun Siva, Ratish Menon, Chinmay Bhogle. All these guys have been asking for our merchandise. So thank you, guys. It's on its way. But play the game first. Play the game.
Only the studs wear it. Only the studs wear it.
No, but you got to play the game as well. I mean, we're going to send you our merchandise for sure, but you want to play the game and get it the right way.
Absolutely.
वैसे भी आई रहा है, तो अभी कोई tension मत लो. Next time, next one.
But speaking of the right way, even these undercards on ESPN and these fight nights are turning out to be such banger events. I'm kind of wondering, is the UFC becoming so deep that fighters are going to kind of shy away and say, I'm not at that level as yet?
I don't know. The thing is that I think there's a card for everybody now. In that sense, there's a spot on that roster. The amount of cards that are coming out. Once upon a time, we would say maybe one pay-per-view and one another fight night, a month.
Yeah.
And this was as recent as 2018.
Correct.
And 2018 we used to see maybe one or two, especially one in Europe, one in the States, and then one pay-per-view.
Correct.
Maximum.
Correct.
But not this bhandar. Every 6 days there is a fight.
Man, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Every week now, it's going to be stacked card. So I think a lot of guys, I'm sure, I'll tell you something. What you might be saying is absolutely right, because a guy like Sean O'Malley, for him to accept a top 20 after facing, a top 10, the fact that he has the ability to do that shows there's a lot of depth, and there's a lot of cards that he can do that on. But of course, he's fighting in 268, I think, right?
269.
269, sorry.
Yeah.
We just saw 269 he's fighting.
Yeah, 269. But yeah, when I see fighters like Andrea Lee, Cynthia Cavallo coming on the prelim card, it just gets me to wonder that now there are so many top fighters with the UFC, even though they have cut almost 300. So the roster was about 900 plus. They are right now on 600 fighters. They have fights every single week, which means, as you rightly said, every 6 days as a card.
Dude, not only that, the
And
DWCS, Dana White Contender Series,
Yeah,
to bring out newer talent.
oh
Ultimate,
man, that's
the
good.
resurgence of the Ultimate Fighter.
Well, the next Ultimate Fighter has been announced. It's got men's heavyweight and a women card. So there are going to
Wow.
be men and women on that card together.
Wow, that's going to be fun. That's going to be really, really fun.
I mean, it's just a resurgence of the sport. I'm telling you. You know what? It was like this. It kind of went up, went down, and now the graph is just going in a
Guys.
different league altogether.
Guys, you know what? Guys, everybody cross your fingers for this reality, okay? Now, if Leon Edwards somehow loses to Jorge Masvidal, can you see
Oh, that fight is off. That fight is off.
oh, shit, I forgot. Yes, he pulled out. Well, okay, I'll tell you what. Jorge Masvidal versus Colby Covington, TUF House. The drama just sells itself. I don't have to. We won't have to say a word. We'll have to have security separating these two guys.
Absolutely.
If they do this.
In fact, the TUF is such a high property that Sony is airing the TUF, which had Randy Couture as the coach.
Oh my! You mean the original with Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell
Yes,
as coaches?
Yes,
Damn, that was
the original TUF is coming back.
That is
on
the first season, baby.
Yeah,
That's the best
on Sony Television, and it just shows so many years later the property is still hot. Legends never die, but
no, man, they never will.
You know,
never will.
Absolutely. But
it's meeting, but it's meeting any legend, man. I was smiling year to year when I met Chuck.
Yeah.
There's no, it won't, I'm not, no disrespect to anybody else. I'll be smiling if I meet even any other fighter, but come on, Chuck is Chuck.
Absolutely. But speaking of legends, we have a legend coming up on the other side.
Yes, sir, we do. We have legendary promoter and fight agent manager, Ken the Man Pavia, the other Huntington Beach bad boy who's going to be making his way to the Fighting Goat. So, ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages. You've been speaking to Arjun, aka Mystic Chips, and the Superhuman Kamra. Stay tuned for lots more.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market, and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Dugirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Fighting Goat, where we have with us none other than the master, the man who cracks the deal, the man with the big bucks, Mr. Ken Pavia. Ken, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
You missed one big point. You know, he may not be the original Huntington Beach bad boy, but yeah, he's the second one.
Well, but he's the one who made the first one. So
there we go. How are you doing, Ken? It's been so long. It's been almost a decade since I spoke to you. The last we met was in hot Bombay.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that a decade's gone by. Went by so fast. It seems like I was in India just last year, but it was good times, great memories, and it was a great experience. I really appreciated being there.
That's awesome. Kind words from Mr. Ken Pavia himself. Ken, I do believe you traveled almost 350,000 kilometers in 2 years between 2011 and 2012.
I ended up with on the Million Mile Club with United. I've done a million miles, so forever I get to forego the lines. But you're in that. You're in that.
That's awesome. That's
crazy. You traveled a lot for all those years, and you had if you look at your entire career from when it began and you look at the companies that you started, what kind of drew you towards becoming a sports manager? What drew you towards sports and fighting in particular?
I think it was an inability to be a professional athlete. I tried numerous times. I went to university in California, UCLA, and went out for the baseball team a couple times, and the coach said, "You're short, you're slow, and you're weak. It's not a good start." So I went out for the crew team. It was too early in the morning. Went out for rugby, got cut. Eventually went out for the hockey team and made the hockey team.
You were the goalie, right?
I was the goalie for the UCLA hockey team, Pac-10 champions. But I had a realization that I was limited in what I could do and how far I could go, given my genetic limitations. And so I relied on my brains, not my brawn, and went to law school with the sole purpose of eventually representing professional athletes. That was my goal and dream. That's why I went to law school. And when I was at law school, I grabbed a couple. I went to University of Miami here in the United States. It's one of the preeminent college football programs. So I grabbed a couple football players out of there and launched my management career. And quite by accident, I stumbled into mixed martial arts.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
It's an interesting story. In 2005, I had a commodities company, and on the side I had the sports management company. But for many years, competing in American sports with a boutique firm, I was the small fish in a big pond. Whenever I got a big star, somebody with deeper pockets and bigger capital would come over and lure them away. But I took my lumps for many years. Well, one day I was sitting in my office with 7 or 8 employees in plain sight, and my door comes flying open, and a guy, a 6'4", 250-pound gorilla walks in, and he walks over to me, grabs me by the neck, and grabs me by the leg literally, and lifts me up on the ceiling, and says, "You're going to pay your debts. How dare you not pay your debts?" I'm looking at him.
Seriously?
I look at him. I go, "Wait, you're Rico Rodriguez, the UFC heavyweight champion." And he starts laughing. It was a practical joke, right?
Oh, man, what a scary joke, though.
Yeah, right? Yeah. A mutual friend of ours walked in and he said, "Hey, Rico, I know you're a sports agent. Rico just had lost the UFC championship, and he needs an agent from a major sport to come over and help him out." So it was a very by chance practical joke where I stumbled into Rico Rodriguez, and that kind of migrated my practice from baseball and American football into MMA.
Man, that's
awesome. That's awesome. So, Ken, I do believe you started your first management company in the early 90s.
Yes. I graduated law school in 91. I launched Fiduciary Management Group, which was traditional sports. Yeah.
Right. And did you always want to be a sports agent, or is it because you could not get into professional sports? You said, listen, I cannot do it, but I'll definitely make a superstar.
I think that I always had that was my backup plan. My backup plan was to, of course, pitch for the Yankees or which is the American baseball team, or play football for the Cowboys, which is the American football team, or do something at the highest level athletically. But, I hit a roadblock. So plan B was then to be involved in effectuate the industry. And that's what I sought to do.
When you compare, when you see a lot of sports athletes and managers coming out of different sports, and I met a couple of guys who work in hockey and cricket and a couple of other sports, and they say it's one of the roughest businesses to be in managing an athlete, especially a growing star. It's like I can imagine John Jones' manager dealing with a lot of shit. I can just see that happening, and you see that with the NFL and the NBA as well. As stars begin to make a lot of money, the problems with it continue to rise. Have you dealt with any kind of problems in your experiences in MMA so far in that sense?
I represent hundreds of fighters, and each one was an individual problem. I think that even the good ones, came with their caveats. But I had some that were just, I had the Phil Baronis, the Joe Riggses.
Oh my God, I remember Phil Baroni, man. He was awesome.
And it was, even when you have 12 employees in your office helping you, a couple of attorneys and sponsorship guy and a logistics guy, they don't want to speak to them. They want to speak to you on a regular basis. They want to have a relationship with you. So when you have 100 plus clients, you're constantly on the phone, being a friend. It's interesting. You have to be a chameleon. You have to be, because every phone call is a different personality. To some, you have to be a father. They're almost childlike, and they look up to you for guidance. To some, you have to be a peer or a brother, because they see you at an equal level and they just want to chat. And to some, you got to be a subservient almost. You got to listen to them and let them scream and yell at you. So and some are insecure and some are overconfident, and so you have the huge variety of personalities. Much like it's even more intense than life. Life, you have variant personalities, but when you're talking about testosterone-filled athletes, that are under so much pressure and stress, and under a microscope, consequently, you have significant variance in personalities. At every phone call, you got to be somebody different. So I always say I'm a chameleon. I'm a son and I'm a father in the next phone call, and constantly you have 3 phones in your ear, always with a different person. You got to remember who you're supposed to be.
That's crazy, man.
Well, any specific incident that you can mention without mentioning names, something that would entertain the fans here in India?
Oh, geez, there's countless, but I off the top of my head, just first one that comes to mind was Tito Ortiz, good friend and client for years.
I told you, the bad boy.
He was doing a promo photo shoot for his clothing brand, Punishment Athletics.
Yeah,
and he flew in like 12 or 15 athletes from all over the country that he at various times sponsored. They weren't necessarily on a training team, but they all wore his attire and pushed his brand. They were paid accordingly. But he wanted to do a photo shoot. And so we had 2 days of 12 hours of photo shoots at the gym with all these guys who kind of knew each other, that were kind of competitive, some were in the same weight classes, and they're all in the same room. And they're all used to having the spotlight on them. And suddenly, you know, they're all fidgeting for the spotlight. And he looked at my girl. And I think he took my T-shirt. And we had, you know, tempers were starting to flare a little bit. and Tito decided to take us all to a nightclub, a very nice nightclub here in Orange County. You know, it was and of course, we made a call ahead of time. We got a big VIP room. And I just remember Baroni that night, you know, he was like, hey, that guy, remember Josh Berkman? He was a UFC fighter. Josh Berkman and his brother and his friends they're looking at my girl. Phil, they're not looking at your girl. Really, you know, I'm going to marry her. They're being disrespectful. No, dude. Your girl's going to look at you. Everybody's kind of looking at her, but nobody's trying to steal your girl from you. Because I don't like that Berkman. He's a scumbag. I'm going to have to fight him someday. So we went to the nightclub, and of course, then you mix a little alcohol into the equation, you know, and everybody's drinking a little.
Man, of course.
And we're in close quarters, like a VIP section, and with 12 or 15 UFC fighters and all of their entourages, small entourages. And Baroni's wife and Berkman weren't facing each other, and they accidentally backed up and bumped into each other.
Oh,
and I just watched Baroni's ears explode.
Oh my God!
He jumped over and he grabbed Berkman and he started throwing punches at him.
Jesus.
Well, that's all happened. All of a sudden, Berkman's brother jumps on top of Baroni. Tito sees fights, and he puts Berkman's brother in a chokehold and chokes him unconscious. I see Dick O'Brien's friends with Baroni, and Justin McCulley was, you know, and they start fighting. And I see, you know, we have like literally 15 people fighting each other, you know, and you don't know whose side you're on. It was people.
Oh my God!
And of course, you have 4 bouncers in the nightclub, and they're looking at 15 UFC fighters, going, "I want no part of this." Right? So it lasted like 10 minutes, and the worst part was when we finally got it settled down. It was calm and everything. Everybody's kind of broken up, and there's scratches and broken bottles and stuff. Berkman's brother was choked unconscious by Tito. He woke up. And he didn't realize the fight was over. So he jumps up and starts throwing punches at everybody. Right? And it starts up all over again, right? Well,
Oh God!
You know, that sounds like a good party. Like, as always.
You know, are you sure that was not the TUF house?
All right. There's a crescendo here, right? So everything gets broken up, and they threw out like 3 or 4 guys. And Baroni and his wife get to the front, and I'm walking out actually with Baroni and his wife trying to keep him calm because he's just an animal. I mean, he's a guy you don't want to fight with outside the cage. And about, I'd say, 20 meters ahead is Berkman and his entourage, and they're walking away. Baroni says, hey, you know, I overreacted probably. I got upset. Do me a favor. I might have to fight Berkman someday. I don't want to, you know, this to escalate, or I might have to train with him or something. Run over there and bring him back here so I can apologize to him. I go, this is just, it got out of hand. I said, okay. So I went over and said, Josh, hey, yeah, please do me a favor. Brody wants to apologize. He's standing right here by the mouth of the nightclub. Come on back. He says, okay. So him and his 2 brothers brother and his friend walk back, and they walk over, and Berkman reaches out to shake Baroni's hand, and Brody throws a right cross. It's a right in the face, right?
And he knocks him off goal.
Just knocked him down. All of a sudden, the brother and the friend jump in.
So basically, it's basically it just kept going on and on.
Oh, all day long.
And what did the club do eventually?
Eventually, they kind of called. Somebody I'm sure called the police. We all got rushed out of there, and it was just a mess, you know. But the club likes to have the fighters come by because the celebrities come by, and that draws the crowd, and the girls come with celebrities, and the guys come because the girls come. True. So, you know, we didn't do that much damage, but it was just one of those nights that kind of goes down in infamy.
Oh, I remember Phil Baroni if I remember, it was in New Delhi, where we were all hanging out together after the show. And Phil got drunk, and he was a character to deal with. Thank God I had Herb Dean with me, and he kind of took care of everything because he literally was the referee. Oh yeah, literally. It was incredible.
He's always making memories. There's always something happening with him.
Before we even get to that aspect of going to your job switch in 2012, in the sense because you've been a manager for so long and then you became a promoter overnight. I don't know what led up to it, because at that point in time I was a photographer who got the shot of a lifetime because I wanted to shoot MMA and I got my dream. And I don't know, walk us through a little bit of how you kind of got to that position. What was the story? How did it begin?
Well, I maybe made a professional error. I represented every client with a passion and prejudice, with only concern for that negotiation. And often I didn't take consideration of the outcome. I would get an argument, say, with like the UFC. Okay. They call me up and they say, hey, we want Anthony Johnson to fight Nate Marquardt main event in New Jersey. And I'd say, hey, Joe Silva was a matchmaker at that time. I'd say, hey, Joe, I really like that fight. It's a marquee fight. I got one problem though. I said, Anthony Johnson is the betting favorite and he's the fan favorite. Mm-hmm. Nate Marquardt's making $300,000. Anthony Johnson's making $25,000 and $25,000 more to win. I said, so break us off. He goes, well, he's under contract. I got it, but it's the last fight of his contract. It was signed when he was very green. Now he's a marquee matchup. He goes, listen, I'm not messing up the salary. I said, well, you got to make this fight. Then Dana White would call me up and flip out on me because that's what Dana White does. He calls and screams and yells and screams and yells. And then eventually the next day they call back and they offer him like $100,000, but I would push back too much, I think, and upset them and rub them the wrong way. And I didn't kiss the ring. I didn't bend the knee. So and I did that a number of times. I went in there with each negotiation and fought for my guys. And I didn't put everything with a nice bow on it at the end. And I made a lot of, and additionally, my business model wasn't to develop young talent and make them stars. My business model was to take stars in small organizations and bring them to the next level. So I was basically, in fact, stealing people's clients. They're leaving their clients and people that built them, like I had I had been doing in years, losing my clients to the big guys. And I was so I was not very popular amongst agents. I was not very popular amongst a lot of the promotions. And I saw the writing was on the wall. I had beef with the UFC and we argued a lot, and I had an opportunity to sell. And opportunity to sell at the time, I had a significant financial opportunity with a content aggregator, basically a fight pass before there was a fight pass out of Canada. So I sold my company to Paradigm, who eventually signed Conor McGregor and became very big. And I went to work for Takedown, which was the content aggregator. It was going to create a massive station. The UFC thought it was such a great idea they did themselves. And about 6 months into it, Raj Kundra called me up and said, hey, I like what you guys are doing. I like what you did in the United States. I very much like to do this in India. I think that India is ready for this and it would work. And he said, I'd like to talk to you and make you an offer to help me do this. And I said, who are you? He says, I'm Raj. He said, you might want to Google me. So I did. I'm like, okay, he seems very legitimate. And I said, where are you right now? And he said, I'm in Mumbai. He goes, but I'll meet with you tomorrow. I said, how do you do that if you're in Mumbai? He goes, I'll catch a flight. And he flew out to Beverly Hills the next day, sat down and made a deal.
Damn.
And that was
And that was it. And that was the start of the entire process. And then you came to India, and then you brought in the entire North American concept of fighting. But a lot of people, a lot of the MMA pundits, and which are actually a part of what I also hate, is because every organization is different from the other. And when you launch a show into a new market, you have to do what is necessary to make it survive in that market.
Yes.
And did you agree with a lot of the pomp and show that surrounded the fights? Did you feel at some point people came in for the wrong reasons? Because the media, the legit mainstream media had a lot of things to say about that.
I think that I didn't know Indian entertainment. This was a foreign concept for me from North America. I had never seen a Bollywood movie, and so I sat down and saw Bollywood movies. I said, this is something very culturally very different to me. And I had to rely on the guys that brought me in where that was their forte. My vision was to incorporate people that had high levels of competency. And Sanjay Dutt knew entertainment. Shilpa Shetty knew entertainment. Raj knew entertainment. So I had to defer to them. My job was to put the best fights on that I could possibly do. I don't think the error so much was in the pageantry. Maybe I'm wrong because you guys are the experts being from India. I thought we were a little premature with the big shows. I thought we should have done more grassroots.
Yeah.
We should have more grassroots.
I think in hindsight, a lot of people, Sumesh, you can back me up on this. A lot of people spoke about, since 2013. But what Super Fight League and you guys did was the way forward. Yes, it was like a shotgun blast through the door. But then people realized that maybe perhaps you needed to just knock, maybe not go that hard. I agree. And
right.
And they and of course a lot of people said that there was a lot of money that went through that process. I mean, had it been done in a smaller manner, it would have probably gone a little longer in that sense.
Yeah, I think that it was important. They wanted to do an international show that drew international attention, and we did do that. Now the problem was they didn't monetize that. You know, it did get the international attention. People all over North America were watching Indian shows. They really were, and they haven't since. You know, and they don't watch Russian shows. They don't watch Middle Eastern shows, but they were watching that Indian show, 3 of them, and they watched it a lot. The problem was that we didn't have a way to monetize it. And I think to monetize it, you really had to have the grassroots. You had to have the Indian fighters. And I was told by our resident expert at the time that the Indian fighters were ready. They're ready for the international stage. They could fight at the UFC level. They've trained hard, and come to find out, I mean, here's the problem with MMA in general. People sit on their couch and go, I can punch, I can do that, I can kick, I can do that. Why don't you just put a choke in? What they don't realize is that guy's been training for 20 years to get to that level. You know, It's relatable. It's relatable. Everybody thinks they can throw a punch. People don't think they can necessarily pitch a cricket ball or kick a soccer ball, but they can think they can fight until they actually try to fight. You know, So we needed Indians that could be successful. And in hindsight, again, be 2020, maybe we Indian versus Indian. So we have a guaranteed Indian winner. So we created that fan base. Or more specifically, I liked your idea. We should have maybe done some studio shows first and built that fan base up. Because our pageantry captured international eyes and audience. And the problem is, again, there's no money there. At some point, people are paying money. Say, what's the end game here? You know, where's the money going to come from? So, you know, everybody's a brilliant and a millionaire with hindsight. You know, if you look back, we should have done some things differently. Did we do things bad? I mean, it depends what your goals would be. You know, if your goals was Raj at a certain level, I think we did some push-ups.
Right. So in fact, it was 2012. I think 1st of January 2012 is when you were officially named as the CEO of SFL. But that stint just lasted till September 2012. Do you think it was too short? And if you had more time, this would have been a better product? Because the vision was there, the money was there, the thought was there. Do you think your tenure was a little too short? And if you had, say, a couple of years to build this, it would be a different, like ball game or a different product altogether?
Well, there was money issues. We were having some sponsorship issues. You know, sponsors, a couple of them didn't pay. You know, and that was they kind of handcuffed a little bit. That was an issue, and there was some controversy, some legal stuff that was blown out of proportion that shed a bad light on us. I'd say 2020. I think, I do think it could have worked. I think it could have worked and been the pride of Pride 2. You know, I think it could have been international show everybody would look towards India for, and I think that Indian fighters would have progressed much faster because the spotlight would have been on India. So I think it was short. I think it still could happen. It still can happen. You have plenty of people there, you have plenty of money there, you had a great television deal. But it was before its time. It was premature.
It's absolutely, you couldn't have put it better. And we used to say the same thing as well. I think till about 2017, when the Super Fight League was taken over by different management. It was taken, Raj, sold off the company, and there was it started off with British management.
Bill,
this British
right?
Bill, exactly, Bill. And
he's come on here a couple times to visit me.
Yeah, but there you go. Bill started a Super Boxing League and the Fight League and everything all together. And I think under his guidance, though, when he made it all Indian versus Indian in a team league format, Somesh, we saw a huge rise of Indian MMA, which gave birth to about 10 more promotions overnight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, I think it was at that point of time that we had one championship sign a deal with Star Sports. We had some other smaller proportions
and the
come
UFC
in on some other broadcasts.
The UFC signed a broadcast deal with Sony.
Yeah, the UFC signed a deal in 2013 with Sony.
It was just around that time. There was a little bit of fire coming in. And if you fast forward everything and you come to today, where you see the Super Fight League is, of course, now they're still working at it because of its own issues. But the boxing league is doing damn well in the Middle East. And there are other promotions like Matrix Fight Night, and you've got so many regional, smaller shows. What we used to see in the US back in the 90s, before the UFC got popular and Prime,
WEC,
exactly, WEC, Cage Rage, and Rumble in the Bronx, blah blah. So many smaller, and you remember Jungle Fights? That shit was epic.
That was Brazil, yeah.
That was in Brazil. So just like that, I think Somesh is involved. Somesh he has an MMA gym and is in fact one of the first Indian Indian promoters to represent an Indian fighter. He's actually India's first agent to represent an Indian MMA fighter in the UFC.
Okay.
So that's
that was true, right? There's been 2 Indian fighters in the UFC?
No, just one.
Which,
Bharat Kandare.
Bharat Kandhari.
okay, yeah, he fought for us in the SFL, but there's been a second one. Wasn't there the bowler from Canada?
No, not
Buller's
Gary
from Canada.
Mundas.
Bullard from Canada.
Oh,
yeah.
Buller. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's one FC, though.
He
Yeah,
fought
but-
UFC.
Yeah. He was in the UFC, but he's not
Yeah.
Indian. Like
Hang on.
technically, he's Canadian.
Canadian, then okay. Most
Okay.
Yeah, he's.
He was good, though.
He's in. He was good. Yeah.
He lost his fight in the UFC, got switched over to ONE FC. He went over to ONE FC for the money, and then for whatever reason, actually, let me not speculate. And he went over there and he found success. He won the heavyweight title there. He fought against
He
Brandon
beat him,
Vera
right?
for the
That's
heavyweight
right.
title. Yeah. Man, I would love to have seen that fight against the Brandon Vera that faced Frank Mir back in the day.
I was there for that fight. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
fun. That was after Frank's motorcycle accident, though.
Yeah.
And
He was.
he
He
came
got years.
And then after he beat Frank Mir, he came out calling out Chuck Liddell, which was really funny.
I just peeked because I wanted to know. Bowler fought 4 times in the UFC, only lost once, and he left coming off of a win too. He's 3-1.
Yeah.
Damn.
He was good. He was legit.
Damn.
But what I believe is that they got in Bullard to primarily spike the Indian market. And in fact, there was more backlash because he's, technically he's not Indian. So when they signed him on and they were promoting him in India as an Indian in the UFC, it kind of backfired. And the people didn't enjoy that aspect because he's technically represented Canada even in the Olympics.
Oh, did he really? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
that entire thing didn't really work out for them.
I think the only way a lot of Indians related to that fighting market was when ONE FC signed over Olympian Ritu Phogat, female Olympian Ritu Phogat, who's a wrestler, who's a legit man. They call her the female Khabib because she's that good on the ground, and she's been dominant in ONE FC. Like every fight, she's maybe lost one round. You got to check her out.
How big is she?
Oh, I think she's what is she, flyweight?
Yeah, I think she's flyweight.
She's flyweight.
I think she's 125 or 115 pounds.
She'd make a good. I mean, if the UFC, I'm sure the UFC knows this. They're already watching everybody, and they see somebody like. But India is coming up with some good fighters now. You've got a couple of guys. I think we're going to see, if we have to see a credible fighter come out in the men's divisions, it will be in the lighter weight classes. I won't see it in a heavyweight or light heavyweight.
Why is that?
Maybe feather or bantamweight.
Why is that, do you think?
I think generally a lot of the guys here who are coming into MMA are lighter guys. The heavier guys have gone into boxing because boxing is in that sense. Well, honestly speaking, boxing is a more lucrative sport at this point in India because you see a lot of. I mean, so many you see guys either they go into wrestling and they stay in pure wrestling, and then the boxers either they go to the military, they come back, they do their stint with the army, and they come back and get into professional boxing.
Got it. Okay.
So a lot of the heavier, like I see a lot of welterweights and middleweights go into boxing.
When I was there, there was they were starting to get MMA gyms. It became sort of trendy and popular. Do you still have a number of MMA gyms?
Yeah, I mean, Somesh has his own. He's got a very popular gym. He can tell you a little bit about his. Sorry, you started in Bombay, didn't you?
Yeah. So I started my MMA gyms in Bombay, but they were a little smaller in size because of the realty cost and the other factors. But eventually, when we moved to smaller towns like tier 2, tier 3 cities, we took larger spaces, and fighters were willing to travel and stay in smaller towns to actually train at a good gym. So that's pretty much our model at the moment. But yeah, a lot of MMA gyms coming up.
Are there UFC gyms there too?
Yeah, just recently launched. But the thing is, here's the funny thing. It's more of a marquee factor. Like, there's a UFC gym in the city versus, there's a UFC gym in the city. If you look at any major fighter, he's not training at a UFC gym. He's got his own camps. He's training at a legitimate place. You go to Big Bear, you train. You go to AKA, you go to ATT, you go to any of the main gyms. And I think Somesh's gym is one of those the heavyweight training gyms. You got legit guys coming in. The UFC guys, we were called to the UFC gym and we went and took a few pictures, and that's boom and this and that, and that was it.
Yeah.
But
I think the model in the States though is a lot of the retired UFC fighters end up teaching at those things. You know,
Really?
it kind of gives them an after career. They teach their kickboxing classes or privates.
Right.
And actually, do you know? Remember the name Razor Rob McCullough?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Well, he was the head trainer for all the UFC gyms, and he used to train the trainers. And he actually, now just by coincidence, lives at my house and is my personal trainer.
Really?
Yeah, he was the head trainer for all the UFC gyms, traveled the world training the trainers.
That's incredible.
Right.
I don't know the deal with India. Sumesh, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know the deal with India yet. It's just launched right now, and they're trying. I think they're aiming it to, they're pointing it towards celebrities, and they're giving them celebrity memberships to kind of just popularize the sport, even though the gyms have nothing to do with the UFC as such.
It's pretty much what Gold's Gym did back in the day, when they wanted to become popular. They kind of got the celebrities involved and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great initiative. But if somebody really wants to fight and take it up as a career, I don't know if that's the best option. There are a lot of other options that are available. So a lot of good grappling coaches, a lot of good BJJ coaches.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the place to be. However, Ken, that gets me to my next question to you. That when you got into the business of management and you were managing over 100 athletes, I believe about 65 of them were combat sport athletes. From when you started and you sold to Paradigm till now, do you think the market has evolved and the need for a good manager is an absolute essential for the top bracket?
A manager that's well connected helps you out a lot. The one element that was prevalent when I was managing at the UFC with combat sports guys that's not there now is sponsorships. And that was something that really drove my industry. My goal was always to match the amount of show money a fighter was getting with sponsorship money. And we would always get more than our opposition. And additionally, get 5-to-1 interviews that our opponents were getting. But the fact that we were getting more interviews led to more sponsorships. The fact we got more sponsorships got me more clients. So that element is not there anymore, yet they're still paying the same percentage, but the money's gone up also. Ever since UFC sold, I think the starting purses have gone up, and the ability to increase your purses off second and third contracts has gone up as well.
That's what I actually want to follow up with you. Did that hurt a lot of business for a lot of fighters? I'm pretty sure a lot of fighters must have been pissed off about that fact that suddenly guys like Donald Cerrone, who made like $100,000 just on sponsorships per fight, suddenly had to give that up because of a rule of the company.
Well, the rule of the company then passed him the protein sponsorship and the alcohol sponsorship and the Monster sponsorship. So they took care of guys like that. The guys that were getting sponsored, the UFC, to keep them happy, would give them marquee sponsors that sponsored the UFC on side deals. Those guys. I think that initially it was big pushback, but I don't think a lot of the fighters were getting the big sponsors. If you're on the undercard of a fight that's not televised, you're getting $500 to $2,000 in sponsors. Now you're guaranteed money from Venom and whoever's the clothing. So I think that everybody, the low level guys, the mid level guys, are getting more money. It's the higher level guys that aren't necessarily getting the high money, but they're relying more on their purses now.
True.
Because the purses are higher.
But honestly, actually, more than the sponsors and more than the money, I miss the shorts because the shorts were really funky. They looked cool, and you could recognize a fighter walking out with that stuff.
Yeah.
Like you knew Anderson Silva had that Burger King on his ass. And you knew Brock Lesnar was tattooed in Diamondized Nutrition, and you knew GSP had his own sponsors and blah blah blah. And it was kind of fun because it was a great way for guys to identify. Like I met a friend of mine who's not really a big MMA fan follower, but he's like he remembers Cro Cop's shorts, or he remembers Chuck Liddell's blue trunks. He will never forget Liddell's blue trunks.
Yeah.
And it's stuff like that, which kind of, now it's like a uniform, which I kind of don't like. I'm like, okay, they've got their names on it, but where's the uniqueness? There's no unique.
I think that really what the UFC did was they made the UFC and the brand the attraction and de-emphasized the individual. The UFC has the fighters are interchangeable. It's the UFC, it's the brand that really drives everything. When you become reliant upon the fighters, suddenly you're in a vulnerable position. So I think that they wanted to become more professional. What they really did was they took more control.
That's the kind of insight that Ken Pavia brings to the entire sport, man.
Absolutely, yes. But Ken, my last and final question to you. From 2012 till 2021 right now, how important is India as a market Are you still consulting with any Indian promotion? And where do you think India stands on the global stage of MMA?
I think India is a huge untapped market. I think the UFC had intended to go there before the pandemic. They just got into Russia. Obviously, they're doing a great job in China. They're doing a great job in Africa. They have 3 African champions.
Right.
Like as you mentioned, they have a great broadcast deal now. But they haven't done shows in India. They haven't brought Indian fighters in yet. And it's the second biggest country in the world, second biggest population in the world. So I really do think it's a huge untapped market. And especially because just by default, by having regional sports and having the sport there in the country for so many years, it's going to grow. You're going to get a population base. And the kids that were 10 or 12 are going to have 5 or 6 years with it. And I always thought India was right because in my estimation, Bollywood was the number one entertainment option. And it was like also the second and third best option. And then deep down, you had like English Premier League and soccer. So there was a void. There was a need for some competition. There was an opportunity there. And I believe then, and I believe even more so now, that if you look around where we go next, India is the obvious next answer because of the population, because you have some maturity now in the audiences. They understand the sport a little bit better.
Yes.
So I'm not working in India. I actually migrated into something else that actually became very good for me, and I'm enjoying what I do. Right. I do international consulting. I do get calls, time and time again. I've traveled a number of times to Russia and the Middle East to do a lot of consulting. But I miss India because I think that and somebody's going to tap into it and somebody's going to make a lot of money. I don't know how yet. I think it's going to be a combination between very good business guys that from the outside they could bring you here and good Indians that understand the Indian market, because you really have to understand the Indian market's very unique.
True.
So to your point, I think that, it's a huge untapped, maybe the biggest untapped market in the world. And I think somebody's going to be on it now that the pandemic's lifting.
No, man, you couldn't be, you were
spot on.
You're very, very close to living. I'm not going to say something. We've got something coming up in the works. So maybe time will tell what's going to happen. But my final, Ken, is
before you answer the question, I want to add one more thing.
Yeah.
I don't think that the UFC or Bellator or somebody like that can come into India and do well. I think that they need an Indian partner or somebody, Indian business people that understand it. India is very different. And you have to understand India. I didn't understand India. I was relying upon my Indian partners, and they were great partners, by the way. But you need people like that, that help monetize it and get their heads together. So
I think that's also one of the main reasons why ONE FC is doing well in that sense, because ONE FC is Singaporean based and there are so many Indians surrounding that. I mean, if you look at Chatri Sityodtong, his number one is a girl named Niharika. And that's his left-hand woman. She's right there. And she's Indian and she understands the sentiment of the market. She knows how things work. And the amount of Indians that they have procured from Canada, the US, from India itself, and the opportunities that they're bringing are incredible. In fact, you see a lot of people, a lot of the, you've got, MMA is divided still. You've got your tier 1 cities that still like Mumbai, Delhi, they still love like the UFC. They know Conor McGregor, they know Brock Lesnar, they know XYZ. But the more you get into the nitty-gritties of the sport, the more you get into it with the sportsmen, the judokas, the wrestlers, the boxers, the kickboxers, the wushu guys, they know ONE FC. Because they're like, I got a call from them. I got a call from them because I want to do Muay Thai there. And so, isn't that right? I think it's more popular with the tier 2 crowd.
It is absolutely.
It is, and it just it brings me back to my final question, Ken. Thank you for giving us so much time to talk about all this. And just one last thing: do you feel that being a celebrity, as being a sports manager in the sport of MMA, is more important now than it would have ever been before?
More important? I always think that it's
just to rephrase it, like in the 80s, you had a lot of promoters that did the job of being a manager as well. Dana took care of Chuck when he was overseas. But but now with guys like Auri Akhtar and Abdulaziz, you see a lot of segregation in promoters a promoter and a manager's a manager.
Yeah, you have to do that. You can't do both. I think there's inherent conflicts if you're doing both. And I think that legally in the United States you can't do both. I think the role is very important. It's extremely important. And you said something earlier that was so relevant. When these guys come into money and they come from nothing and all of a sudden they become a celebrity overnight, it changes people, and they lose their perspective, and they do things that are emotional and not rational. And it's incumbent upon that manager to ground them, or at least reel them back in so they don't make mistakes like John Jones did. Like a lot of these guys do. The role is crucial. A personal relationship with somebody that has experience is critical, I think, for the long-term success of an athlete. And the ones that you don't hear from that have long careers, I think behind every great fighter is a good manager. And, they say behind every great man is a great woman. I think behind every great athlete is a manager whispering in his ear. It's so easy to get off the beaten track. It's so easy to make mistakes.
Yeah.
So I would have to say that a good manager is critical.
And that's, it's incredible. It's been so amazing talking to you. And thank you so much for all the time that you've given us. We here at the Fighting Goat would, honestly, Ken, one of these years, we're just going to fly you down. We're going to get you here to the studios and do a live one with you all over again.
I'd love to come visit, just watch some fights out there again. Yeah, periodically. I catch YouTube clicks because, my stream picks up stuff. And I see occasional Super Fight League or highlight. And the level has just increased exponentially. It was so primitive back then. It was so it was two people kind of and now you're seeing real MMA. I mean, you wouldn't know they're Indian. You would think that they're any other advanced where the sport's advanced. They fit in, and even the body types are changing. You're seeing lean, muscular guys who obviously put a lot of work in the gym, and now it's not an Indian fighter; it's a fighter, and which is says something.
That's
Absolutely.
true. Very well put. Very well put, Ken. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to head to our next segment. We've been talking with Ken Pavia. Ken Pavia, quick shout out to all the Indian fans. You got something to say?
I appreciate the way I was. You hosted me when I was there. I appreciate the way you guys treated me. And at some point, I'd like to come back and visit. Keep up the good work, support the sport, and let's get some Indians in the big promotions now.
Thank you so much, Ken. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're going to be talking about the return of Misha Tate next week. Don't go anywhere. You've been listening to The Fighting Goat only on ivmpodcasts.com.
Eventually, you'll see the end of your childhood.
Get accustomed to womanhood.
Enjoy the experience of sisterhood.
Might get to wifehood.
Or not. Choose motherhood.
Or not. You'll learn to define your personhood.
Earn a livelihood.
Change the neighborhood.
And get rid of the falsehood that life post-academia is easy.
So join me, Natasha.
And me, Ayushi.
On a journey from station starting point.
To station, what now?
Next station, Pudin station. And hopefully, Agla station, adulthood.
Fresh episodes out every Thursday.
The MMA star maker and the former promoter Ken Pavia, who was here in India heading Super Fight League before he moved on to better opportunities. But man, he spoke such beautiful things. He spoke about how great the sport is, how SFL was too big too early, and obviously India being one of the main markets for MMA in the world. We also heard Dana White saying that. So, I'm smiling. So I know what's coming up. I know what's happening.
What's coming up. We know what's coming up. But the fans
what's coming up.
You gotta wait. You gotta wait and find out. But guys, the thing is that I love. We've had so many guests on the on the Fighting Goat.
Yeah.
And and we've always had guests who have already spoken their minds and they've told us the truth. But right. I think I've never met somebody who was so eloquent, who said it so right, who said it so well, without disparaging anybody, without taking names in a bad manner, without shedding, without creating any controversy of any such.
Absolutely.
And he was the way he said it was so cool. He just shows his temperament as a manager as well. He's calm, he's collected, he knows how to say the right things.
Well, he clearly spoke about how he has to be a brother, a father, a mentor, and various other roles for various fighters. Man. And come on, managing over 100 professional athletes. Jesus. Oh my God.
And not to mention that awesome story of Phil Baroni in the bar.
Big shout out to the man himself, Phil Baroni. Dude, we love you.
The New York badass.
Badass.
We're gonna get him on the show one of these
Absolutely.
days.
We're
gonna figure it out. We're gonna figure out a Legends tour. But actually, that was a good foray into the business of fighting. We had our first guest into the business of fighting. We've got a lot of new guests coming up. But before that, we're going to talk about the upcoming return. It's not return. She already returned.
Man,
second coming.
she returned
Of
with
Misha
a
Tate.
bang. So when we speak about legends, we speak of Phil Baroni, we speak about Chuck Liddell, there is one name in the women's division who took a break and who said, listen, I'm going to be
How
back.
many years? 4.5
4 years. 4 years. She went off. She has 2 children. And now we have the return of Misha Tate
Dude,
2.0.
Dude, there's something to that 4-year mark. GSP did 4 years,
Yes.
came back, and I beat Bisping and won the title,
Yes.
and then retired. Now
Yes.
Misha Tate comes back, beats and wins, and now is making a run to the title.
Right.
And I
Right.
think the shape that she's in, the mindset that she's gotten now, that break, I think, gives a lot of fighters a lot of clarity.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. You know what? The thing is that once you're a fighter, I don't think you can live a normal life again. It's very, very difficult. There's always that, you need that breathing space. You just need to unwind. You need to recuperate, and when you're in the active pool, you do know that USADA can come knocking anytime. I cannot take, what I want, maybe some supplements, sometimes cough syrup, anything could actually be a problem. Hence, at some level, you just want to tune out, take that break. But Chips, as you rightly said, that 4-year mark is like a magical figure.
Right?
You just take that 4-year break and you come back. And it's happened multiple times.
I'm taking a 4-year day. I'm taking a 4-year break from the gym. Now you see what happens. I've taken my 4-year break. Now
But
I'm
you're
on
in
my
top
way
shape.
back.
You're
I'm
in top
getting
shape.
back in the what top means, like literally a top. You घुमाते ना वो top वाला shape पे, हाँ, that's my current shape right now.
See, we focus on performance. We don't focus on cosmetic looks. Yeah. So we focus on performance, and your performance is absolutely top-notch.
Our producers at Sony are telling us that we need to start focusing on the look as well. So that's why I'm actually going to be receiving my superhuman gym bag and gloves today, so
Yes.
I can too be in tip-top shape. I can't wait to get back in fighting ways.
Absolutely. But there's one person who's in tip-top shape, and she's making a comeback on this week's card in the UFC. That is Misha Cupcake Tate. The fight card is in front of me. And man, we have Jojo Calderwood on the card. We have Rani Yaya on the card. We have Michael Chiesa who's on the card, and we have Misha Tate. And it's a fight
Michael Chiesa, after he fought Vicente Luque, is making his way back.
He is the co-main event of the evening versus Sean Brady. But yes, since the card is so stacked and we are such huge fans of Misha Tate, we're just going to make one prediction for the evening, and that's for the main event, which is Katlyn Vieira that takes on Misha Cupcake
That's a tough fight. That's a really, really tough fight. Katlyn Vieira is a very strong, tall, lanky fighter.
Absolutely.
She gave the champ a lot of trouble. And
just because she's Brazilian. Come on. Just because she's Brazilian, you're kind of,
Yeah. Plus, she's a little cute also. No. Come on. No. We're not objectifying any of the fighters. Even though sometimes ho jata hai by mistake. No, but they are fighters first. But Misha Tate and Katlyn Vieira is such a great matchup on paper. Both these guys come in with good striking. They both, and the thing is, it's going to come down to the grappling, because Vieira has got some very, very heavy grappling. Misha Tate as well. She's got some amazing grappling. The way she choked out Holly Holm in the last second to win the belt was incredible. You can expect fireworks from both these women, and Misha has been working on her striking really well as well. So it's going to see, will the grappling cancel each other out, and will this be a striking clinic, or will this get down and dirty?
Well, it's a very, very beautiful analysis that you have made. But Katlyn Vieira is, I think she's lost 2 in her last 3. I don't know.
Can you tell me who she's lost to in the last 3?
She lost versus Yana Kunitskaya in her last fight. And before that, she lost to Irene Aldana. And she's only beaten Sijara Eubanks.
Interesting. It's going to be interesting. But Katlyn Vieira is a very, very tough opponent regardless.
Absolutely.
I think it's going to be a good fight.
It is going to be a great fight. So, Chips, a prediction for the main event of the evening?
I'm going with my girl, Misha. I've always loved Misha from Strike Force. I've always been a big fan of hers. And her resurgence is proving out to be something.
Absolutely.
She wins this one in style, we might be looking at possibly a new contender for Amanda.
Absolutely. Miesha Cupcake Tate, who has beaten Marion Renaud in her comeback fight. It also won her the performance of the night bonus. So she was 50 grand richer. Not that she needs the money, but I know that she's doing it for the
she
belt.
got 2 kids suddenly. You need the money. Kids are expensive.
Absolutely. Yes. But Chips, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think Miesha Cupcake Tate is completely renewed. She's energized. She's coming back with a mission. And I personally am going with Miesha Cupcake Tate for this one. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to win some exciting OG Fighting Goat merchandise, make your picks. Hashtag us, tag us. Chips, what are your IDs?
Well, on Twitter, I am at the Mystic Chips, and on Instagram at Arjun Chips.
Woohoo! I am Somesh.Kamra on Instagram and Somesh_Kamra on Twitter. So make your picks, have fun, get a chance to win some exciting Fighting Goat merchandise.
Guys, get your t-shirts. We're going to get a lot more. We've got caps, we've got t-shirts, we've got fridge magnets, we've got keychains. We've got everything that you can imagine coming up on the Fighting Goat. Lots of gifts and goodies. Just tag us, hashtag us. You just heard our IDs. Always tune into ivmpodcast.com for a lot more content. And thank you for joining us on this wonderful, wonderful episode with celebrity agent, fighter agent manager, Ken Pavia. It was an incredible episode. Thank you, Ken. And thank you to all our fans for listening to The Fighting Goat. This is Mystic Chips and the Superhuman Kamra saying sayonara and see you next week.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, it's a double century episode. Ashwin, DJ, and Varun are joined by our special guest, Nikhil Chopra. They talk about the last few games of the T20 World Cup and where it all went wrong for Team India. Two of the most cherished things about festivals are food and memories. On KBCD, Farad and Sunhetru take you on a trip down memory lane. It's lined with great food and joyful moments. On The Habit Coach, Ashton is joined by Sriram, the author of Happiness Habits, the Urban Professional's Guide to Good Living. They discuss how to make happiness a habit in today's world. On 30 Minute Raste, Keshav takes us to the city of Warangal. Legend has it that the entire city was carved with one rock. And on The Wire Talks, Siddharth talks to Ghazala Wahab, executive editor of Force magazine. They discuss her new book, Born a Muslim, Some Truths About Islam in India. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And do follow us on YouTube. We have a number of different channels. You can find them on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where you'll be able to take a look at all of the channels we have. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week: Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much. You make this possible.
If you love cricket, listen up. The Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast is here for you. Hosted by DJ, Varun, and me, Ashwin, we bring a fun, fresh fan's point of view to talking all things cricket. Sometimes it's just the three of us, sometimes we have guests, including current and former international cricketers. For new episodes every week, check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.